I'm excited to share this discussion with our guests today on the DYOJO Podcast. We have the Rachel Stewart. She is the author of Unqualified Success. And so I reached out to her. I was surprised to find out recently I was one of the first people that reviewed her book. So that's pretty awesome. Because I read this book, I shared it with my wife, and she listened to it on audiobook, and both of us really grabbed a lot of great insights from it. It's been one of the best books, not just from our industry, but just in general, that talks about personal, professional development. It moves, it reads really well. She shares some great personal stories as well as quotes and examples from figures that you'd recognize, and there's a thread through the book of a character that's the story evolves with this character, and it's just a really cool way to have told the story. And there's a big reveal at the end that I don't want to spoil. So well written book, awesome content. But she talks about, so the subtitle is Bridging the Gap Between Where You Are Now and Where You Want to Be to Achieve Massive Success. So there's a quote that we shouldn't think of ourselves more highly than we ought, right? We're all kind of, I think for the most part, understand the concept of not being, incorrectly prideful or unfounded sense of pride. And the term narcissism gets kicked around a lot, right? So I looked it up. Right? It's pretty easy to look up nowadays. But narcissism is a noun. It's excessive interest in or admiration of oneself and one's physical appearance. So that's not super descriptive. But in psychology, selfishness involving a sense of entitlement, a lack of empathy, and a need for admiration as characterizing a personality type. So I thought it was funny. Not funny, just revealing narcissistic personality disorder. People throw that around a lot. A disorder which a person has an inflated sense of self-importance. Narcissistic personality disorder is found more commonly in men. The cause is unknown, but likely involves a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Symptoms include an excessive need for admiration, disregard for others' feelings, an inability to handle any criticism, and a sense of entitlement. So it's pretty popular to throw that tag on somebody else, but maybe, especially if it's found more commonly in men, maybe us men need to take a little bit of inventory. Are you having an excessive need for admiration, disregard for others' feelings, an inability to handle any criticism, and a sense of entitlement? So that's the one extreme, right? Where you're trying not to have an improper sense of pride, an unfounded sense of pride, or being narcissistic. But the flip side of that is if you're not supposed to think of yourself too highly than you ought, the flip side is you're also not supposed to think of yourself too lowly than you ought. And I remember speaking about this with a group of people, just sharing it's a right assessment, right? You want to be honest with yourself, see your potential, and I think part of narcissism is like over evaluating your potential rather than your accomplishments, right? Or your attempts to make progress. And so that proper assessment of oneself, your opportunities, and your willingness to take on risk. We talk about this. One of my mentors, Denis, talks about this on episode 15 of the DYOJO Podcast, No Risk, No Reward. But that, being willing to say, I am unqualified, but I have relevant experience. I believe I can learn. If you teach me, give me a chance, I will succeed. And so that goes, like I said, so her bio here, I've done a poor job, I realized, of kind of, talking about our guest bio. So I'm going to try to do better at that. But so she, as she talks about in the book, went from the office manager to now the executive vice president of Titan Restoration, based in Arizona, a growing organization that's it's a lot of fun to see, what her and their team are doing, on LinkedIn and those kinds of things. She wrote the book, which was released in 2019. And if that's not enough, we discovered on episode 9 of the DYOJO podcast with Mark Watley that she's also the editor in chief for Actionable Insights, which is a great resource for everybody in our industry. Tons of information on Xactimate, Matterport certification, and those kinds of things. They're on the cutting edge of a lot of that. And she's also, if she's not busy enough doing that, also being a mom, editing, writing, and she mentions, she's working on another book, but she's also the founder and CEO of Xcelerate Restoration Software. So, and everybody knows if you just have, if you're already busy, the best thing to do is try to develop a new software, right? So it's out, it's running. We're going to talk about this in this episode, so hope you enjoy this as much as I did. The DYOJO Podcast with Rachel Stewart. Hey. All right. Well, we're here with Rachel Stewart from Titan Restoration and Xcelerate Restoration Software. And you're down in Arizona. I'm imagining it's probably pretty warm down there.
We had a really great spring, but it's gotten hot pretty fast. So, yeah, over, low hundreds.
Oh, geez. We had a heat wave. It was, 85 and all of us are dying. And then now we've got rain, the beginning of the week. So, so I wanted to talk, I know we've talked previously and you talk at great length about kind of your introduction into the industry and your book. I've got it up on the shelf, the Unqualified Success. So I guess maybe we'll fast forward a little bit, but you went from, being a mom to being an office manager for Titan Restoration, and then your career accelerated rapidly as they saw, the diamond in the rough that they had. You had knowledge, and I think that's awesome, relevant experience that you can turn. Our industry is not difficult, right? You can learn all the components of it. So how did you go from that process from office manager to general manager? And then now, I was trying to think of something funny. Your title is, Grandmaster or.
Okay. So I would say like the catalyst behind all of that was just my desire to keep growing and being hungry for knowledge. And so, like what I was actually qualified to do was probably not even what I was hired to do. But I just had this hunger where I just wasn't going to stop learning. And we're so lucky. We live in a world where knowledge and access to information is like right at our fingertips, literally. You can just about Google anything.
Yeah.
So I was just committed to really, studying everything. So at first it was just learning how to do accounting and managing the books and learning how, the P&L and the balance sheet work together and what the impact different things have on your business, and kind of just grew from there. And as the company grew, there were just different opportunities that I was able to kind of put myself in a great position to take. So,
well, that's kind of, I guess, a question we'll have at the end is talking about Xcelerate. But you talk about in the book, and when we talked previously, the company didn't necessarily understand its financials, those kinds of things. It was a running company, but didn't necessarily have that nailed down, and even not coming into the industry necessarily with experience. Had you had prior like accounting or office management experience?
No, I mean, I really came totally unqualified for the position. So it was even learning the basics of accounting, which, I mean, there are a lot of complex accounting, don't get me wrong, but I don't think our industry is one of them.
Yeah.
So I think if you have a solid understanding of cash flow, you have an understanding of a P&L and a balance sheet and job costing and all that kind of stuff, you can do really well. And so I just gained that experience on the job, like learned, how even just all of the insurance process, how all of that worked, and got some processes in place and kind of went from there. So.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I mean, and like I said, we'll get into the Xcelerate, but that's, I think the number one for anyone getting into business is maybe you know the skills of your industry and you maybe know intuitively how to build a business, but getting into the numbers is what takes you to those next levels, or can really kind of hurt you if you don't have a firm understanding of what's going on in the nuts and bolts of the business, right? So
Yeah, for sure. And I feel so lucky that that's kind of where I started,
yeah.
because I just, got immersed in it. And then I had a really good foundation as I moved more into operations. So I was really lucky that way.
Yeah, I think you can do, there's extremes. If you're only money or only production, those extremes can hurt. You need to be able to meld them together. And you came in on the financial side, and then you went rather quickly from office manager kind of to general manager, right? You talk about in the book, he was really entertaining, the owner was entertaining, selling and or merging and kind of wanting to get out, and you identified, man, there's really an opportunity if we stay independent to grow this puppy. And as they were interviewing and you guys were working with a consultant, kind of everybody was like, well, you're the person that we're looking for. How do you remember that moment and kind of how that transpired?
I think was a great situation for the owner. And so all I was doing was going to bat for him and saying, hey, if you want to get out of managing the day to day, that's totally fine. Let's just go recruit and hire somebody really great. And I just kept kind of pushing him that direction. And I said, I'll do all the work for it. Me and the consultant will work together, and we'll get somebody great in here that can kind of run this thing. You can step out, but still have ownership and kind of control this thing. And anyway, so then a couple of weeks later, they came back and offered me the position, which I was not expecting. I hadn't even. I was like, you do know I have no management
Right.
experience. You know where I came from, but nobody will be as passionate. Nobody will work as hard. Nobody will stop learning. If you'll invest in me, I'll invest here. And
Right.
it ended up being a great combination for us. So
Yeah, I mean, I feel fortunate. I had a manager that did the same, that said, I was pretty resistant to getting into management. I was like, why would I want to do that? And, but I think of how many companies have those diamonds in the rough that if you're not getting to know your people and giving people opportunities to advance, you're going to miss, those key opportunities. So I think that's a really cool story.
I know you. You know you. And I know you know that I know you.
I think for the people that are in there, I think if I had waited for somebody to find me, so to speak, or whatever, then I would have been waiting forever. But
Yeah.
I think taking those opportunities, like in a lot of ways, I had already assumed a lot of the responsibilities of that role,
Right.
without necessarily waiting for a title. And I know that can kind of be tricky depending upon your owner, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity to get in and make a difference,
Yeah.
instead of waiting for a job title or something.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so, finding that balance, right? And you talk a lot about that in the book of, making opportunities for yourself. I know most of my opportunities, you kind of have to put it out there, right? And say, this is something I want. And I know I've counseled people over the years is, you may not think you want it, but one of the biggest thing is, do you want somebody else to come in and take over that role?
And now it's time for a not-so-subtle ad break.
Okay, so I'm excited as we're talking about Unqualified Success with Rachel Stewart and her career trajectory. What stands out is just that growth mindset, right? Being able to say, much like we talked about with Denis on, episode 15, that no risk, no reward. I can do this. I can learn this. And so one of the keys, whether you're just starting out your career and you want to take the next steps, you're a manager maybe who has to help other people develop their skills, or you're an owner trying to cultivate that kind of growth-minded culture where people are taking ownership and want to see opportunities. I'm working on a collaboration of content related to Xactimate. It's one of the keys to the kingdom. in insurance restoration. That's the working title of the book, The Keys to the Insurance Restoration Kingdom. But it's about mindset and habits that lead to success, particularly around estimating. So even if you don't use Xactimate, it will be helpful. But, commandment number 1, so you may know in 2018, I released an article with Restoration and Remediation magazine called The 10 Commandments of Xactimate Estimating Success. And commandment 1 was, thou shalt sketch accurately. And I'm not even talking about the level 2 and level 3 certification stuff where you're doing spiral staircases and complex roofs. I'm just talking about the basics. It's amazing how many estimates out there don't have the basics down. So, we talk about technology. I forever have used, a graph paper sketch pad. I've updated to an iPad Pro with the Apple Pencil, still on graph paper. But, episode 5, Andy McCabe talks about the Matterport camera and other technologies for 3D scanning. Mark Watley from episode 9, they've got Matterport training and other ways to advance your Xactimate skills. And I know Water Damage Daily, they've talked about using that in their mainline business. And so, the tools are out there. Hopefully this podcast is a resource for you growing yourself in your career, but also please keep an eye out for The Keys to the Insurance Restoration Kingdom, working title, book by John Isaacson, resource from the DYOJO. Thank you for listening. Let's get back to our conversation. And looking back on it now, had they hired somebody else, do you think that you would have, I'm sure you would have made it work, but that would have been a whole different transaction.
Yeah, I think I still would have loved it. I still, was loving what I was doing. I was learning a lot, learning about the industry. I know we would have probably worked hand in hand in some capacity, eventually probably been on an executive team. But I didn't have a problem reporting to someone. I just, I just wanted this to grow, and I wanted it to be more. And I didn't, I didn't think the merge with the other company, because they are a great company. They're one of our great competitors and everything like that. I just, the ownership structure and the way that it was going to go down, I just didn't think it was really good. So, anyway.
Good intuition that it wasn't the right fit. So I was thinking as I was preparing the questions and whatnot, so you got into property restoration as the last economic downturn, the recession in 08, 09. Is that something that you've thought about or reflected on? I know, I'm sure you have. We've thought about, my wife and I have thought about that a lot. So is there any nuggets that have come out of thinking through that relates to then and now and how you guys are conducting business?
Yeah. So, again, the 2008 crisis was a personal crisis for our family or whatever, that then it led me to go back into employment. So I think just in general, and that's been one of the best things in my life, having this opportunity and growing and all of the things that have come out of it, that would have never happened without that crisis. So I think that's the first one. It's just that a lot of times when we're in something that's really difficult and it feels really heavy and really bad, but the change that it forces in, you to take, and some of the steps that you end up having to go down and the road that you end up can actually be, one of the biggest blessings in your life when you look back on it. So I do think that crisis can lead to opportunity. So I would say that first. Secondly, one of the things that we did in the 2008 is that we were really careful about cash. And I think everybody's kind of talking about that. But we've always kind of run the operations to, be slim, be efficient, manage overhead, all of those kind of things. And so, we never really kind of got into leveraging for our equipment or the next thing. We're also all careful about growing at, with the cash that was generated from the business. So being really careful about not over leveraging. And then the other thing is we got really careful about collections. Oh, so if you're not on top of your AR, now's the time to really get on top of your AR because that's one of the things that we saw. So yeah, insurance kept paying and all that kind of stuff. But if those checks went to the homeowner and they were in a tight situation and stuff like that, trying to get that money later. So being really strict about your policy there, you know, and working with the insurance company to figure out what their policy is about getting work authorization, like anything with a 2-party check, following that money all the way. So, you know, and all it takes sometimes is really great communication with the homeowner, so they know what to expect, and you know when that check is getting there, and you're saying, okay, a check's coming tomorrow, somebody will be by to pick it up, all of those kind of things. So you're not sitting there waiting, because if you're waiting 3 weeks and then try to go follow up, it can be a difficult situation depending upon, you know, the situation that they're in. And so trying to be, you know, understanding and compassionate about that, but also know where your money is. So that was one thing. Another thing is that we found really great talent. In fact, like one of our superstars, and I'm not, you know, we grabbed them at this time in 2008, you know, when people were getting laid off, and, you know, he was in commercial construction. And they had just laid off a bunch of people, and he was pretty high up there, you know, and had a lot of knowledge, a lot of education, and a lot of experience, and we were able to, you know, pick him up. And at the time we were a small company. I mean, that's talent we would have never been able to attract at another time. So I think, again, there's opportunity, and so look at your talent pool and who you can grab. You know.
It don't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning's winning.
Yeah. Well, I think that seems to be a lot of the conversations we're having, and, you know, with a lot of people, is it's both, you know, on a personal level, and people with families and those kinds of things. I can remember in 2008, like, it was devastating. We had our own company, so it went from things were going on a great clip to just dead. And so, you know, it was one of the hardest times, you know, personally and professionally, but also some of our best memories, you know, as a family. And like you said, when you persevere, you know, it prepares you for next. And as companies, you know, that's, you know, thinking through exactly like you're talking about, having cash flow and being what it means to be healthy, you know, is critical. So.
Yeah. And I would also say, like, emergencies that are like tragedies that feel like the end of the world, like, you know, I mean, I'm sure at that time that was devastating to lose your business, to do all that kind of stuff. And then if you can fast forward and look where you are now, you're like, okay, I landed, okay, you know, like, it wasn't the end of the world. I ended up in a good position. I'm doing great things. I'm still in the industry, all of those kind of things. Like, sometimes, you know, it's not necessarily what we want or the ideal, but it still turns out okay. Yeah.
I believe it's Mother Teresa. She has the quote, I know God won't give me anything that I can't handle. I just wish he didn't trust me with so much. So, you know, and it was cool. You know, we had friends and family and things that rallied around us, and definitely lessons learned. It makes you grateful, you know, once I got employed, you know, about a year later with Belfour, and it makes you a lot more grateful for, you know, your opportunities and those kinds of things. So, and I'm sure that's part of the superstar you're talking about. You know, it's devastating to lose a career and then to get a new opportunity, and it, you know, it puts things in perspective, you know, when people give you an opportunity. So,
yeah.
So Unqualified Success, best-selling author. My heart goes out to you. You said you had one of the big events that you were really looking forward to presenting at, and I apologize, I don't remember the name of the event, but so Unqualified Success, and I know I've heard you on other podcasts and those kinds of things. What, I guess, is a multi-part question. What kind of was the impetus to get it written and that process? And then, you know, what have you seen from that, such as, you know, the opportunity to speak at an event that you were really looking forward to that unfortunately got canceled due to COVID? Did it get rescheduled, or do you know yet?
You know, it's just been on hold right now. I mean, I hope that I mean, I don't imagine that he's done doing these events. And so I imagine there'll be another event, and I'm hoping that I'll get invited back to speak. But actually the book was came out of that. So I've been going to Burn Harnish's Scaling Up conferences, for 6 or 7 years now. Well, actually, no, that's not true. Since the end of 2015, I think, was my first event. And they do twice a year. Anyway, so, I've just been I've heard so many incredible speakers at this event. And so for your listeners who don't know who Vern Harnish is, he's the author of Scaling Up, and he just works with a lot of businesses. The Gazelle's coach, they're all a Vern Harnish kind of group. And
yeah.
Anyway, so we had started scaling up in the company, and we had hired ourselves a Gazelle's coach, and then we started going to these events as kind of a product of that. And so I was at the fall event, and I was sitting there, and I was like, well, I would love to be on this stage one day, and I'm like, well, okay, what would I have to do to be able to do that? And everybody that he invites are authors, so I'm like, okay, well, probably one of the first things I need to do is write a book. And anyway, that's kind of how it went from there. I felt like I'd been writing a lot on LinkedIn. I've been doing some things, and so I felt like I had kind of something that I wanted to say. We were getting ready we were kind of dabbling with the idea of launching this job management software. And so I wanted to increase my visibility in the industry. So all of those kind of things kind of collided. And then, I was just running into so many people in my life that were like, oh, I can't do A, B, and C because I haven't been trained, or because I haven't done this or whatever. And they were letting all of these excuses get in the way of accomplishing their dreams. And anyway, so all of those reasons combined are kind of what was the catalyst for me writing the book. I made that goal in October. I said I wanted to have it out in spring, so I gave myself a 6-month deadline. Anyway, so then the book came out in April, and I was supposed to be speaking at the May, a year after the book launch. So it took a little bit of work or whatever, like getting some speaking opportunities, doing a lot of podcasts, getting some name recognition, all of these kind of things. I kept building up my resume so that I would be able to say, hey, I'd love to be on this stage. So anyway, it happened, and then it didn't. So thanks, COVID.
Yeah, thanks coronavirus. So I'm sure you'll be back. So on a much smaller scale, I had a local event that I was going to do the closing keynote for, and they just announced that it got canceled as well. So, but the theme, would you say kind of, one of the opening lines in the book is, if you want to get good at anything, you have to be willing to suck for a period of time, right? Understand and embrace that I'm not going to be necessarily the best at this, but I'm going to figure it out. And I think that's if you're thinking about a growth mindset, right? It's like the fear of failure is far more damaging to your development than actual failure. Because if you fail, you can actually learn from it and progress. Whereas if you just are captured by fear of failure, you won't progress. You have no opportunity to develop and grow.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm always pushing my people to try the new thing, to stretch themselves, to grow. And, sometimes the biggest thing that's holding us back are it's our own self-talk. It's our own self-limiting beliefs. It's what's going on in our head. Yep. And a lot of times we think that, oh, if we just had this, or if we just did this, then we'd feel more comfortable, or we'd feel more qualified, or we'd feel ready. And I think that day really never comes. At some point you just have to jump in and get started. And so the sooner you start, then, like you said, the more valuable input that you have. Like if you run it like a science experiment, you're just looking for data. And anyway, so I do think that a lot of it is just getting going, just moving in the direction.
And now it's time for a not-so-subtle ad break.
Are you familiar with our podcast within the podcast? Yeah, that's right. I'm talking about Pro versus Joe Podcast, which is the podcast within the DYOJO Podcast.
37 minutes. Engage.
So the idea here is we take a Joe, somebody who, Brian Close with All American Real Estate Services out of Tacoma, Washington, familiar with construction, very versed in property management and other complex systems and, organizations, but pivoting their business into property restoration, insurance world, right? Non-program work thus far. Praise the Lord. And then myself, the quote-unquote pro. I know, crappy choice, but, you got to roll with who you got.
On Location Podcast. Pro vs. Joe.
And so we talk about the industry from two different perspectives. So it's really cool to hear Brian coming into the industry, fresh set of eyes, learning about the nuances of restoration, mitigation and repairs. They're mostly focusing on repairs as they work with a lot of mitigation contractors. And then, I get to share tidbits and information from things that I've learned over the years.
Pros versus Joe.
And I believe it's a good conversation. I think if you're just starting out in the industry, if you're thinking about pivoting to the industry as well, if you're a manager trying to train and inspire your team, it'll give you ideas and concepts that you can relay. Sometimes those things we take for granted as quote-unquote pros, right? So please take a peek at Pro versus Joe Podcast, the podcast within the podcast. And you can check that out as well on the DYOJOpodcast.com.
Pros versus Joe.
Yeah. One, my wife wanted to jump on before we got started, but she had to take a call. But for both of us, your book has been, I think it's one of the best, not just in our industry, but on the topic of, very practical, very down to earth. I love how you thread the one story through the whole book and then reveal that's something personal to your family. It's very, you've got a lot of the elements, as far as like motivation, those kinds of things, but it's also extremely practical. So,
thank you.
Yeah. Are you planning on a number 2?
I have some thoughts for it, like the whole Unqualified, I could definitely see a series of, so you have Unqualified Success, you could have Unqualified Teams and, all of these different aspects. And, so a lot of my career has been building teams. And so I would think that that'd probably be the next one I would write, but.
Well, that's difficult for leaders, right? Sometimes, you feel like you've built and you've been able to push yourself, but it's different, motivating different people, that can complement your team and those kinds of things. Sometimes it's hard to identify the strengths and weaknesses in other people to allow them to flourish, So
yeah,
I think,
yeah, absolutely.
I guess I wanted to ask, in relationship, the book is personal and professional development, and like you said, building teams. So can you think of what is the best one simple thing that someone could start on as far as their personal professional development that they could do today that would kickstart? And then on the flip side of that, what do you think are some of the worst or most common things that people do that kind of hold them back?
So I would say the number one thing you can do is be curious and be hungry to keep learning, to keep stretching yourself and ask the questions, right? Okay, what do I need to do next? Or, a lot of my growth was just a product of me going, okay, where do I want to be in 5 years? And what would I need to do now to develop those attributes, Yeah. And so, writing the book was kind of like that. Okay, if I'm going to be the leader of this great company that I want to be leading, and if I want to have done all these things, if I want to be speaking on stages across the world, if I want to be doing those things, what do I have to do today to start to prepare for that later? So much of our time can get bogged down in the weeds of the day-to-day problems. And if you let them, you'll be spinning your wheels in that mud all the time. And so, you really have to kind of get yourself out of that and go, okay, where do I need, and look ahead at the future, not just for your business, where do you want your business to go, but where do you want to be and what kind of leader do you want to be? So I would say that is what you should start doing. What you should stop doing is probably procrastinating, waiting. I would also say, like, a lot of times we have the mindset that there's a scarcity out there. I'd get rid of the scarcity mindset and kind of adopt an abundance mindset. Like when you get away from like that fear of like having to control and having to manage and you can't share because there's only so much to go around. If you can kind of shift to an abundance mindset where there's plenty to go around and there's plenty, especially in this environment where it may feel differently. Like there's so much that I've learned just in the relationships that I have been able to develop over the years because I've been willing to share. And I really learned that from the owner of Titan, Russ Palmer. And he was always great at relationships. And he was always, even in our marketplace, sharing his ideas with competitors, being generous with equipment or like how we could help each other build and stuff. And so as a result, he had so many great relationships in the industry. And that's where I learned so much, is people mentoring me. And just, you know, when I would be at a conference or whatnot, just being able to ask a million questions. Okay, I'm dealing with this problem. How have you guys approached that and all that kind of stuff? So again, staying curious, but then also realizing on the back end is that being generous with what you've learned, what you know, how you've gotten to where you have. And, you know, I don't think that there's probably a secret at Titan that I wouldn't share with Russ's blessing, just because I know that it's not so much like none of us have a magic sauce or magic secret. It's all about the execution.
Right.
And so being consistent in the executing. I mean, we all know what we're supposed to do to grow our business. We all know what we need to be doing to expand or solve the problems, you know, improve culture. Like we all have the answers. It's a matter of how do we execute it, you know. So
that would be great. Okay.
When we talked previously, I was saying, you know, I've been wanting to write a book, but I'm trying to find, you know, something new or some new way to approach it. And you're like, you know, I think I remember you saying, you know, there's not really a new, it's just your take on it, right? You know, your experiences combined with that, and then whether or not you're going to be brave enough to do something about it. So I think that's, being curious, being generous.
Yeah. Into a podcast the other day that went right along with that. Like, so this person was talking about innovation. It was a TED Talk, and I wish I could tell you who that was. I feel bad. Maybe I'll send it to you. You can link it to the podcast. But anyway, it was a TED Talk, and he was talking about that there are actually no real good idea, like a lot of like the ingenious creations come out of recycled old ideas or bad ideas. So then he starts talking about like all of these artists and all of these like musicians and stuff, and how they're just remix of old songs from somebody else or bad songs that never went anywhere, and they just get a new spin on things. And so I do think that, yes, there's some stuff that's like truly innovative, but I do think that there's a lot of stuff like if you just recycle and repurpose. So like an example I have is, you know, Spanx, you know, that whole line. And the only reason I say that is because I talk about Sarah Blakely a lot in my book, but, you know, all she did was take pantyhose and like repurpose them into, you know, undergarments for women. And anyway, I'm on a podcast for a bunch of construction males, and they're like, what are you talking about?
Well, I'm wearing my Spanx, so.
Right? So, I mean, that was just something that was already there that was repurposed and you know, changed. And I'm not, anyway, so.
Well, I wouldn't be. You got like Lululemon and stuff like that. They're making wear for men and workout wear or whatever. So, well, you know, so, and so finally, I wanted to talk about the Xcelerate Restoration Software. I've been peeking at it some, and we've got a few contractors that we work with that, you know, obviously are updating their systems and getting into it. I think when we were talking offline, you were talking about more of the analytics and the data, and we talked about that just previously. I mean, a lot of contractors start out, right? I can think of a drywaller we work with. So, you're making $20 an hour working for this guy. And if you can make 25 to $30 an hour working for yourself, all of a sudden you have a business, right? And you're making it. But not everybody thinks about insurance and taxes and knowing their actual, cost of goods sold and doing business. So where did you all come up with the idea that you wanted to, I imagine you had a great testing ground using it there at Titan. So how has Xcelerate been developed, and what's kind of unique about the platform?
Yeah. So I want to be careful about this a little bit, because there are some great people in the industry that maybe work for some of these competitors, but
sure.
where it really kind of came, the birth of it was out of frustration, really, about the options available to contractors. And so we had been on just about every job management platform there was over the years. We were on Client Runner when that was, we were on PSA previously, then we were on Client Runner when that got adopted by NextGear or purchased by NextGear. So then in that process, we had moved over to NextGear, and anyway, we're on Dash for a while. So we had exhausted a lot of the options out there, and there were things that we loved about each system, but there were a lot of frustrations. And one of the biggest frustrations was just the ease of use for people in the field, and an adoption by our technicians in the field. And I think that's kind of where it starts. Like your information is only so powerful, and the program is only as good as the information that gets in it. And if it's too cumbersome and too hard to use, and if it's not easy. So that was one of the things that the other, from a management level, from a high level, I was just tired of the lack of data and the lack of analytics to run our business. And as we were scaling and as we were trying to compete, and especially like right now where there's so much private equity money coming into the market, and things are consolidating and stuff like that, like our industry is going to be changing. And on the other side, who we're doing work with and for the insurance carriers and all of those kind of stuff, they are highly involved in their analytics and what that means, and how they can stay profitable and still continue to grow despite the increase of cats and all of those kind of things. Their whole business is based on analytics, and they're investing a lot of money in InsurTech.
Yep.
And on the other side, I'm like, we're using platforms that were built in 2008, and I can't even get photos out of this job management system in any timely way that is like actually labeled the way that we put them into the system. Like, how am I going to be competing against anyway? So
or the techs are waiting for it to load,
yeah.
so it slows them down.
I was just like, we live in a world where I can order something off of Amazon and I can have it at my doorstep that night. And I'm like, there's something wrong. The technology is out there, but we are not utilizing it, and it's not done in a way that benefits contractors.
Yeah.
And so just after, seeing what was out there and what we thought we needed to be able to scale our business and be able to compete, that's kind of where it was born. It was just kind of out of necessity. I don't think any of the partners that were kind of went in on it were like, hey, I want to grow up and own a software company. But we saw a big need, and we thought we understood problem well. We thought we understood the industry well. We thought we understood the contractor really well, and we could do something really amazing. So that's kind of how it was born. And what the things that we're most excited about are just the ease of use, and then the really good management tools that it gives. Like even smaller companies, when you're trying to grow and scale, eventually you're going to have to be getting out of the weeds and kind of putting that on some of your management. But how do you keep an eye on it without feeling like it's all going to fall apart? And that was one thing. I didn't think that there was a really great way that you could give visibility on all of the jobs, all of the projects, all of the notes, all of that. Anyway, so
So many of them have compatibility issues, and then, like you said, if you build it from the ground up to where the text that is where the information comes from. So if you can eliminate that duplication of the text, put it in, and then a superintendent or project manager touches it, and then somebody else has to touch it, and you're just gonna the gain. So does your program integrate with Xactimate and like Contractor Connection and those kinds of things?
Yeah, so we're working with Xactimate right now to get an integration, Xactware, So I think they wanted to make sure that we had some major users that were on it, that were like partnered companies with them. And I think we have enough big names now that they're willing to do that. Obviously that's always tricky. So we'll see how that goes.
Big piece of the in the works. So, well, great. Okay, so we got the Unqualified Success, Titan Restoration, Xcelerate Restoration Software. Yeah, I was thinking, you mentioned, you all wanted to develop a software, so it's not like you had anything else to do, right? So, but I would imagine the big benefit, you guys have been able to test the beta on your own company, right? As you develop the software and
it's, like I said, it's been a perfect combination because we really understand the problems and I think across the board it doesn't matter. I know franchises deal with some different problems than independents and vice versa, but at the core the job is the same, and like the difference is kind of the reporting and the analytics that you can get out of it, and really what we wanted to do was synthesize information. So we could have death by numbers, but how do you use it? And for a lot of people that grew up in the industry and don't have kind of a financial background or whatever, like sometimes what they need is it synthesized in a way that's very actionable. Like, okay, if I take this step, this is going to improve my bottom line or this is going to improve my efficiencies, like just finding correlations that they can and kind of giving it to them in a very easy digestible way is kind of what our mission was. And so that's been super fun and super exciting, and like we're excited about where that's going because we think that's going to be a game changer.
Well, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to looking at it more, and then especially if some of the companies we're working with decide to utilize that, it'll be fun to see how that helps them. So technology is great when it helps, and when it's cumbersome, it really makes life miserable. So like you said, we've done so many iterations of different programs, and so each, like you said, each one of them has their pros and definitely their list of cons. So well, I know you've got another appointment coming up, and thank you so much for joining us. Any other closing thoughts or encouragement for our vast audience?
Yeah, I just think that, all of this was based off of not really knowing or having the answers, or not knowing what I was doing basically, but having confidence that I could figure it out, and that I could surround myself with people who had already been there and were really talented. And so I would just encourage those, like, if there's something that you're wanting, but you've been sitting on it because you're afraid, or you don't know if, whatever, all of the fear things that maybe come up, to just go ahead and take the first step and get moving towards it.
Yeah, the first step often is the hardest, right? So, well, thank you, Rachel, for joining us, and we'll put a bow on it. That's a wrap. Man, I thank you to Rachel Stewart for coming on the DYOJO podcast and sharing her insights. I can honestly say, I'm gushing about the book, but I can honestly say you can actually see my notes in the book. As I was reading the book, it was crystallizing in my mind some of the things that I needed to be more intentional about, with the DYOJO. And so, with her encouragement, and I did reach out, I talked to her via the phone shortly after read the book and prior to publishing my review of it. The reviews on Restoration and Remediation magazine, also on my website, DYOJO.com. But honestly, it is one of the best books I've read in recent years, on personal and professional development. So, if you caught some of the things she talked about, not waiting around to be found, she talked about seizing the opportunity. And so I've spoken to a lot of people about how life is about opportunity, not convenience. And so I can remember early on in my career, one of the guys, I understood that paperwork was the way that you get yourself, you make the job of your boss easier, right? And that's a way to make yourself valuable. And so paperwork was one of those things. And so I remember having a conversation with a fellow employee early on. They're like, well, if they pay me more, I'll do more. And I remember thinking like, man, I don't think that's a right mindset to have. It's do more, and then they better pay you more because you're showing your value. And then if they don't, then you've got to decide whether you need to take, your talents elsewhere, and go somewhere that will value the additional work that you do. But it's not often in the working world, and that's something we need to be aware of as managers and leaders. People in a position of leadership is looking at giving people opportunities to increase their roles and responsibilities and show their value. And if you don't catch them, you'll lose them. One of the things, like when you're engaging people of different generations or different backgrounds, different cultures, is understanding that the way they interpret things may be different than the way that you interpret things. And so finding ways to connect and communicate more clearly so that you don't miss out on good talent and have them leave. I love the quote that Rachel gave. It was, crisis can lead to opportunity, right? And then part of that was, in the last Great Recession, in the last recession, finding talent, when other industries were laying off and those kinds of things. So she talks about self-limiting belief, or thinking that if I had this, or if I had that, or if I did this or that, then I would be ready, and not limiting ourselves with that. So the tips were: be curious, be hungry to learn, ask the tough questions, and then have a vision. If you're thinking about where you want to be, what does it take? What do you need to do? Get some people that can help you, understand what you need to do to get to that next step. And then, the stop doing is stop procrastinating, and then stop having a scarcity mindset, but embrace an abundance mindset. So I know we've had other guests that have talked about that as well. So, man, that's just... I had a wonderful time talking to Rachel, and you can tell, she's a go-getter, and just, a nice blend of humility, but, but not allowing that, not limiting yourself, So I believe I can figure that out, right? And then proving it, and aligning yourself with people that will give you opportunities, and help you when you fail. So I was interesting. I wrote an article that I worked pretty hard on a while back on Ted McCarty. So it's probably not a name that you recognize, but he helped bring Gibson guitars back from the brink of extinction long ago. And as they were coming out of World War I. So you can find that on Medium. It's called The Keys to Resurrecting a Dying Brand Are Much Simpler Than You Think. But what's really interesting about Ted McCarty is, when he got to Gibson, they were losing something like $10,000 a day. And I break that down in the article, what that is like in modern times. But they had a really bad manager that was, the workers really did not enjoy working with, and was holding people back. And so by getting down on the floor, walking and talking with the people, he identified a diamond in the rough, kind of like Rachel, somebody that he could partner with that really helped him understand the business and get things in order. And they formed a lifelong partnership that they took to 2 other guitar manufacturing companies. And so But just, the article talks about, ways that just simple ways that getting down in with the people, the process, the production, and the progress, the 4 Ps we talk about, the blueprint for success from the DYOJO.com. But anyways, I think that the article ties into what we've been talking about with Rachel, and then also what we'll be talking about in the next episode, the Pro versus Joe, episode 4, the podcast within the podcast with Brian, just kind of building on some of the other conversations we've having about transparency, treating your people well, treating your partners and your subcontractors well, and how that leads to long-term success. So thank you for listening to the DYOJOPodcast.com DYOJO Podcast.
This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.